Hi, welcome to a tutorial I've been meaning to do for a while, ever since vMix started including color correction in their software. I've been trying to come up with a system which I thought would be relatively simple for people who don't understand color correction from the outset. So if you're a broadcast engineer, look away now. There'll be no talk of IRE or millivolts or anything clever like that. I've been lining cameras up for quite a few years now. So having looked at what's available in vMix and what you've got at home, I thought I'd try and come up with a system that was relatively simple that most people could understand. So before we start, let's talk a little bit about setup. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is look at your camera and make sure everything is set to manual. So you're going to want to set your ISO, aperture, white balance, anything that might have an automatic setting, switch it to manual. And you want to do that because otherwise we're going to make changes to the color representation from the camera, and any one of these systems will counteract what you're doing and you'll just end up chasing your tail. That doesn't mean that you can't do anything with color correction. It might make an awful camera on semi-auto look better, but to do it properly, try and turn everything off. And it's not just the camera as well. A lot of monitors will have things like automatic noise reduction and dynamic contrast, and it's the same thing with those. If you leave them on, you could end up fighting those while you're trying to line up a camera and then balance it with your other cameras. So now we've got past that, let's talk a little bit about how you set your camera up to do a lineup. The most important thing is lighting. You want to have your camera using the lights that you're going to be using when you're live or recording. Now this might sound really obvious, but what people tend to forget is light pollution from other sources. So for example, if you were shooting in an office, you might light your subjects and then think, oh, I don't want those big fluorescent lights on. So you turn them off and it affects your color balance. Or alternatively, if you were doing a live event, you might set up during the day, but the event isn't until the evening. Color balance during the day, the daylight goes, the color changes. So try and think about your light source when you're setting up. Okay, so let's talk about scope, shall we? Okay, so in vMix there's lots of different scopes. It's very complicated. We won't be going through all of them. Today we're only going to use two. We're going to use waveform Y, which shows you the overall luminance or brightness value of the picture, and we're going to be using waveform RGB, which shows a similar representation but showing you the individual red, green and blue colours. At this point it's worth pointing out, if you didn't know this already, that your picture is made up of red, green and blue. Those are your three primary colours that make up your picture. And when you have an equal balance between those colours is when you'll get a good representative picture. Okay, so let's have a little look at our project that I've got down here. So the first thing here is a graphic that I made. It has three colours, black, grey and white. We'll come back to their values in a moment. This here is still taken from a DSLR that I plugged in. This is a sheet of A4 printed on a standard inkjet printer and shot in normal daylight. And this here is, it's not an identical shot, it's a second shot from the same camera. But what I've done with this is deliberately set the white balance incorrectly. Okay, so let's go back a bit and have a look at our first image here. Now I made this, and although it might look like black, grey and white, it's not quite black and it's not quite white. And at that point it's a good idea that we have a look at our first scope, which is the waveform Y. So the waveform Y shows you a brightness representation of what you're seeing in the frame. So If I click on this graphic down here, you'll see you'll get a lot of mess. So if you look at this area down here, this is the black elements within the text. If you look up here, this is the whitish outline of the text. And then obviously this is our fairly bright yellow through to deep red graduation behind. And that's only looking at the brightness level. Okay, so let's go back to our 3-bar graphic. So I said these weren't quite black and white. What I've done is made this graphic so that the black is, and this is where engineers might get quite upset, on a traditional scope these would have markings on them. But to keep it very simple, I'm going to talk about this as being 0 and this being 100%. And I hope that makes sense to everybody. So down here, the black. When I made this graphic, I set this black to 5%. And the reason for doing that is because if I set it to 0, we'd have virtually no colour information to play with. And I want to be able to see what's happening in the darkest part of the picture. The second one in is the grey. Now I've set that to 50%. So that's the midpoint as far as the brightness goes within your picture. And then up here, I've set this white at 95%. And that's the same reason that I set the black at 5%. If I set it to 100, it would be very hard to actually see what we were doing with it. Okay, so all of that is in waveform Y. So in that, all we're looking at is the overall luminance of the picture. So now let's have a look at waveform RGB. Now you're thinking, oh, that's not changed. Now the reason for that is because this graphic is perfect. As in, there is no colour information in there at all. So it looks identical. So if I go back to waveform Y, so this is just the luminance, and we look at the graphic here. That's what I showed you before. Now let's switch it to waveform RGB. Ugh. Now all of a sudden you can see that what it's done is it's split the relative values of the red, green and blue into 3 separate elements. It just looks like a terrible mess. Okay, so that's the main difference between the two. So RGB is going to separate out your colours. Y is just going to show you the luminance levels. Okay, so let's go back to our fantastic graphic here. So I made this and printed it out on a bog standard A4 inkjet printer. And then set it up under daylight and shot it with a DSLR. And that's this image here. So at the moment we're still looking at the Y waveform, so this is just the brightness or luminance if you want to be posh. And as you can see, our midpoint here, what should be our 50% line, is quite high, but our 5% line and our 95% lines aren't bad. Now you might think, oh, it's a bit messy. Well, that's what comes with using a piece of A4 paper rather than an expensive broadcast chart. Because as you can see, these ripples here are where the inkjet printer didn't print very well. Now, let's have a look and see what the colours look like in this picture. So as you can see, it doesn't look too bad. You know, the grey's not bad. So let's have a look and see what it looks like if we look at the RGB waveform. Again, the colours have separated slightly, but not bad. Now let's have a look at our horribly balanced camera. Ugh! That's not good. That's very broken. We'll come back to that. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is try and optimize our good picture, and then we're going to try and balance it with our terrible picture. And we want to be able to see a comparison across our test graphic, our first shot, and our second shot. So the simplest way to do that is we're going to go to Add Input. We're going to add a color. We'll just pick black. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put these 3 items as overlays onto that color. So we're going to open it, and we're going to go to multi-view, and we're going to pick our not bad picture, and we're going to pick our terrible picture, and we're going to pick our proper graphic. It doesn't really matter how you split these up, because all you want to do is compare one to the other. Now we're going to go to our position setting, still in multi-view, turn on cropping, and we're going to slide that down. So at the moment we can see our terrible camera and our test graphic. Then we're going to go to overlay 2, and we're going to do the same thing again. and we're going to crop it down. So now we can see our not bad camera, our terrible camera, and our test graphic. I'm just going to go back to that because we don't really want to see, we don't need to see that much of that. Okay, so let's have a quick look at that. Ugh, it's awful. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at this camera here. Obviously, if you had more cameras, you could separate these out however you like to make a comparison to try and balance them up. But what we want to try and do is we want to try and get the black, the grey and the white here to look like the black, the grey and the white here, and to get these to match. Tall order I know, but we'll have a go. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try and optimize this camera here, so the one that's not bad. Okay, and we're going to start by looking at the exposure, because we want the exposure to be correct before we start messing around with the color balance. So we're going to come out of the RGB waveform and we're going to go to the Y waveform, so it's just luminance. And as you can see, it's not bad at all. That's not bad. If we try and adjust the middle part of the picture here, it will affect either the lower part of the picture or the upper part, so that's fine. So now we're going to have a look at the colors within this. So we're going to switch over to waveform RGB. Now, if you look, you can see that what's happened is that it's split the three colors. So if we take the middle, for instance, we can see that we've got a bit of red fringing out the top, and we've got a bit of green at the bottom. And then in the darker part of the picture, we've got a bit of red at the top, a bit of blue at the bottom. So what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and achieve two things. We're going to try and get the colors as balanced as we can across the light, the middle, and the dark parts of the picture. But also we're going to try and pull this middle section down to 50%. Now, some cameras will have an offset middle point because they have a contrast curve that suits either the lighter or the darker part of the picture. But I'm going to assume that you're all shooting on red or Ariflex or something like that and want it to be perfect. So let's go with that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the middle here. Okay, so we're going to come to our little cog down on the input, down here, and we're going to choose color correction. Now, obviously, first thing to do is make sure it's on. And when it comes up by default, it'll have these color wheels here. We are not going to use those. The reason for that is because they're very hard to adjust because they rob Peter to pay Paul. So if you move in one direction, you're not just adding one color, you're taking another away. As you can see, it's good fun to play with, but not very accurate. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to our color bars here. So what we'll have is lift, gamma, and gain. And if I move those over, that might make more sense. So lift is the dark part of the picture, gamma is the middle part of the picture, and gain is the light part of the picture. Now, obviously, most of our color information is in the middle here. So what we're going to do is adjust that first. And as we adjust that, I'm going to point out that all three of these areas interact with each other. And I'll show you that by, let's have a look. If I pull the blue down in the light part of the picture, you'll see that it drags the middle down with it. Not as much, but it does. And then if you look at the dark part of the picture over here, you see that also moves. So whenever you move one of these, all three areas interact. And what we're going to be doing is moving those around to try and get the ratios as best we can. Okay, so let's start with the middle part of our picture here. So we've got quite a large step here and quite a small step here. So our sort of mid-contrast point is quite high up in the picture. So we're going to pull this down. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to sit it on the midpoint there. I'm going to overshoot it. And the reason for that is because when I bring up the darker part of the picture here, it's going to push this back up. So by sort of overshooting the middle point to start with, we've got more of a fighting chance. So I'm moved the green, so now I'm going to move the blue. And you'll see that what we're trying to do is sit one on top of the other and not have anything showing. Now, depending on how clean your source material is, this will be much easier to do. I'm having to guesstimate it because I'm using an A4 piece of paper printed on an inkjet printer. If I had a $1,000 grayscale chart, it would be different. Okay, so as you can see, we've sat our mid colors over the top of each other, and they're not looking too bad. But what we've done by doing that is pushed out the dark part of the picture way off the scope here. So let's do something about that, shall we? So we're going to bring the blue up, and you'll see the way it moves the middle. And we can get that to about the 5% mark here, and it's just over the middle, so that's not too bad. And we'll bring the green up to match, and do the same with the red. Now if you notice, this now isn't as nicely aligned as it should be. We'll come back to that. At the moment, the worst part of our alignment is here in the lighter part of the picture because we haven't touched it so far. So the blue is at about 95%, which is great. We're going to take the green up so that lines up, and then the red. Now, this might seem very long-winded, but once you've done this a few times, you can get this done quite quickly. Now, you'll notice this has pulled this back up again. So what we're going to do is try and pull that back down. Now, it does take a little while because obviously the way the items interact with each other, every time you make an adjustment, it will move stuff either way. And at some point, you have to kind of say, that's good enough. So that's looking pretty good in the lower part of the picture. The mid part here, it's not quite on our 50%, but it's not bad. But you see we've got some slight red fringing there, so we'll try and pull the red down. Try and lose that. That's looking better. And then let's pull the bottom down here, so we'll push that back up. And this is what you want to do, just keep going backwards and forwards until you've got the best setting that you can. And as you can see, these, if you look at this scale here, the increments that I'm moving are tiny. And that's why doing it this way rather than using the color wheels is a much better option. Okay, so that's not bad. They've got a little bit of red fringing here, but it's not too bad. So let's go back and look at our actual picture here. Now this didn't look awful beforehand. So let's turn off what we've just achieved and see what it looks like. Oh, okay. So if you look at the black here, it's sort of like a bit greeny grey. And you can see the difference in the contrast because you can see that although this is supposed to be mid-grey, it's much brighter than it should be. So if we turn our adjustment back on, you'll see that we've got a much nicer, glossier dark black here. The grey looks more like 50%, which is what it should be. White looks okay, about the same, but it wasn't too far off in the first place. Let's have a quick look and see what that looks like compared with our control graphic here. So if we compare that, that's not bad. And the grey here. Obviously, again, because this is a cheap printout, we've got some lighter areas and some darker areas here. But if you pick out the mid-tone of the grey, that matches quite well. Okay, so now the moment of truth. Let's move on to this monstrosity down here. Okay, so we're going to do exactly the same thing again. First of all, we're going to check and see what our luminance levels are. So we're going to switch over to the waveform Y. Now, this isn't as nice as our other camera here. And while I'm talking about that, obviously, when you're setting up, try and get your camera as close to spot on with the camera itself. If the camera has good white balance settings itself, do that first. You know, make sure you've got no filters in. Anything like that might affect what you're doing. Okay, so let's go ahead and set the exposure here. Now, on your camera, what you'd like to be doing is using your iris, ISO, whatever you might adjust the exposure with on your camera to get your light part of the picture to 95% in the camera. The more you can do in the camera, the better. But I don't have that luxury, so I'm going to use wonderful vMix to adjust this. So I'm going to go to the cog down the bottom here, and I'm going to open this up. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to color adjust. And we've got what's called black stretch and white stretch. Excuse me. So the black and white stretch basically elongates the upper and lower part of the picture. Sorry, a little dehydrated. So we're going to go to the black stretch here, and we're going to pull this area of the picture down to the 5% that it should be. So let's move that down to 5%. And then we're going to take our white stretch and move that up to 95%. And as you can see, we've got a very similar looking picture to our not bad camera simply by doing that. But we're only looking at the luminance, not the colour information. So let's switch over and see that again. Brace yourselves, everyone. Oh, okay. So take your bets now at whether or not we can get this looking anything like the other camera above. So same thing again. Go to our cog, open up colour correction, and let's do the same again. Let's start in the middle. So we're going to do exactly the same. We're going to pull the green down, and we're going to overshoot it a little bit in anticipation that it might get pushed back up by the dark part of the picture. And we're going to sit the red over the top and sit the blue over that. Now, as I was saying about sort of the way the areas interact with each other, at this point, while you're sort of getting a rough guide, don't worry too much about some fringing. And this will be a lot easier to look at if you did have a better chart. I mean, I printed this out at home. You could take a decent image and take it to your local copy shop and get a much higher res, nice quality printout on matte photographics. You don't get too many light reflections off of it. It won't be as good as a broadcast chart, but not bad. Okay, so let's go back to the dark part of our picture here. We're going to use the lift controls. We're going to bring the red up and set that at about 5%. And we'll do the same with the green and the same with the blue. So they're not looking too bad. Oh, the brighter part's well off. So let's tweak that next. So we're going to bring that down to 5 here. And we're going to push the green up to 95 rather. And the blue as well. I apologise now, broadcast engineers are probably tearing their hair out going, what's he talking about with percent? It's not percent. Okay, so that's not looking too bad. Now, let's have a look at our image over here. Now, that's not bad at all, is it? If I turn that off, that grey looks really nice. The black still looks a little bit off here. So let's just go back and see if we can tidy this up a little bit. So we're going to have a look down here at the darker end of the picture. There's got a bit of blue up the top. So yeah, we can just tidy that up a little bit. Look at the middle. Push the blue up a fraction. Try and lose that and overlay it. And pull the red down. And then with the up the top there, maybe pull the green down a fraction. Push the red up. Sorry for the running commentary. I can't think of anything else to say whilst I'm doing this. But the more I do it, the more you can see how it works. As I say, you will get much quicker at doing this. I make it look like a bit of a faff, but if I wasn't trying to explain how to do it, I can do this very quickly. Now, this isn't the sort of ultimate way of setting these things up, but as I said at the beginning, I'm trying to come up with a way that you could do this quite simply at home. Because I know a lot of people, you know, they're not professional broadcasters, but they would like to make the most out of their software. Last few final touches. Again, you know, our grey isn't perfectly at 50%, but it's not bad. I think I can do anything with that blue down the bottom there. No. Okay, so let's have a look. And that's not bad at all, is it? So we've got our original graphic down the bottom here. We've got our not bad camera at the top, and we've got our horrific camera in the middle. And just to show you how that all looks originally, we'll turn our not bad camera off, and you can see the difference that's made in the contrast. I don't know how well this will come out when I upload it, but there's a slight pinky tone to this grey as well. So even though it looked good to start with, we have made quite a difference to that. And then if we go over to our horrendous picture and we turn that off. So this is what we had to start with. Not bad and terrible. And then we corrected the terrible to look not bad. And then we corrected the not bad to look even better. And as you can see, those do not look too bad at all. So I hope that all makes sense to everybody. As I say, with a better chart, you could achieve a much simpler result. But I wanted to make this as sort of accessible as possible. And I hope that all makes sense to you. Thanks for watching.